Hello and welcome to the History of Bangalore. I am Ramjee Chandran with episode 112 of season 3. In the last episode, we looked at Charles Cornwallis, the general who had lost America at Yorktown and was determined to restore his reputation in India. Charles Cornwallis first took up his post as the Governor-General of India in Calcutta. But when the campaigns in the south weren't going exactly like he wanted them, he got on a ship and made his way to Madras, where he would lead the southern campaign, and that's where we are. Before any army can march, typically there's another war that takes place parallelly, one of diplomacy. In this case, before the Battle of Bangalore took place, both sides, Mysore and the British, were looking to get the support of the Maratha Peshwa. And in this episode, we go to Pune to visit that diplomatic duel and how close the whole thing came to falling apart. And then the British prevailed. Before I get into the story though, a word of thanks to my sponsors, the Prestige Group, for their corporate support. They make this podcast possible. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. In 1790, there were two embassies in Pune, and by embassies, diplomatic missions. One from the British and the other from Mysore. Both of them were trying to win the hand of the Maratha Peshwa to their side, and both of them wanted the same thing, 10,000 Maratha cavalry that would decide the upcoming Third Anglo-Mysore War. The British mission was headed by a man, Charles Warre Malet, the company's resident at the Peshwa's court, and this was the man responsible for British diplomatic relations with the Marathas. He was also the primary architect of the British policy across the Deccan. He had been working with the Maratha court for months, pressing the case for an alliance against Mysore, against Tipu Sultan. At the same time, while all this was going on, Tipu Sultan had sent his own emissaries to go and speak with the Peshwa. The Peshwa clearly was enjoying the attention. There's an interesting incident that's related when, at some point during those months that the two embassies were in Pune, Charles Malet walked through the streets in the evening and came face to face with his competition, much to his discomfort. These were the envoys that Tipu had sent to Pune. They were going to meet the same minister he was meeting, as Malet would later report to Cornwallis. Tipu's men were seeing Nana Phadnavis, the Peshwa's powerful chief minister, at night, while Charles Malet could only see him by day. And this was the most powerful minister in the Maratha Confederacy, sitting in the middle, refusing to commit to either side until he absolutely had to. Now let's understand why this mattered so much. Why was Malet losing sleep over men that he was passing in the street? To understand this, you need to understand what Maratha cavalry meant for the British campaign. Cornwallis's army was assembling at Vellore in preparation for the march to Bangalore. And that march was built around heavy siege artillery. That was logical. Their targets, Bangalore and eventually Seringapatam or Srirangapatna, were fortified cities, and you needed heavy artillery to breach the walls. But heavy artillery is slow. It moves at the pace of bullocks hauling those heavy gun carriages through rough terrain, often slushy terrain. And in the Mysore interior, where Tipu's looties, and these were his fast raiding cavalry, could appear out of nowhere, hit a British supply column and disappear before the infantry can respond. It was a slow-moving army burdened with siege guns, and it was perpetually exposed. Without a really fast mobile cavalry of their own to screen advances and protect their supply lines, the British column was vulnerable at every step of the march. The Marathas had that cavalry. Without them, the campaign was possible, but it was precarious. With them, though, it became a three-front war. The British from the east, the Marathas from the north, the Nizam of Hyderabad from some other direction. That would stretch Tipu's forces to breaking point and make it impossible for him to concentrate against any one of those three enemies in particular. Malet understood the Marathas weren't a desirable addition to the coalition, but they were a structural necessity. Remove them, and the military logic of the entire campaign would shift. Tipu Sultan understood the same thing, and that's why he sent his own men to Pune. Tipu Sultan's embassy arrived with two experienced diplomats, Kutubuddin Khan and Ali Raza Khan, seasoned negotiators who knew the Maratha court. Importantly, they knew Nana Phadnavis personally, and they arrived carrying something that Tipu had long withheld from the Marathas for years: the tributes that he had to pay them, money owed to the Marathas, payments that Tipu had been avoiding. Suddenly, it was paid up in full, accompanied by warm words and the manner of a man who has just settled all his debts and is ready to do business. Now, this was their calculation. We are serious, we are solvent, and we have a proposal. The Mysore argument made to the Peshwa was, in the cold light of history, entirely correct. If Mysore falls, they told the court, the Marathas are next. The British won't stop. They don't reach a border and settle accounts. They accumulate territory by territory, alliance by alliance, subsidiary treaty by subsidiary treaty, until there is nothing left to absorb. The Mysore argument was, join us now, a southern alliance. Drive the foreigners out while we still have the chance before they become too powerful. The argument is basically a house divided, and you know the rest of it. The Mysore was right. Within 30 years, the Maratha Confederacy would be finished. The British absorbed it in stages. First, a subsidiary alliance with the Peshwa in 1802, the Second Anglo-Maratha War in 1803, and the final, conclusive Third Anglo-Maratha War in 1817. Everything that Tipu's envoys had warned Nana Phadnavis about in Pune in 1790 came true. But in 1790, it hadn't happened yet. And prophecy is a weak currency against a more immediate appeal to one's self-interest. What Tipu was offering was a future without the British. What Malet was offering was the territory that the Marathas could recover right now. A future with the British, but it was not going to be any future at all. Now that's where Nana Phadnavis comes in. Nana Phadnavis, his full name was Balakrishna Janardhan Bhanu, but nobody called him that. He was the dominant political figure in the Pune court. He had been the Peshwa's chief minister for decades, outlasting all his rivals, surviving coups, and navigating the sort of factional court politics that had destroyed better men with some regularity. The British called him the Maratha Machiavelli, partly admiringly, partly because they could never quite get a read on him. He was patient, deeply suspicious of everyone, and acutely aware that in this particular moment, both sides, the British and Mysore, needed him more than he needed either of them. So Phadnavis was not going to be rushed. He had no reason to be. Think about his position. On one side, the British, wealthy, militarily formidable, offering the recovery of territories with the credibility of a power that generally delivered on its promises. On the other, Tipu Sultan, proven in battle, recently arrived, tribute in hand, all the debt settled, offering an alliance and a future in which the foreigner was expelled from the southern peninsula entirely. Between these two offers sat Nana Phadnavis, collecting intelligence from both sides, meeting both sides day and night, and calculating with the sort of patience that became characteristic of him, which choice left the Maratha Confederacy strongest after the war, and that would be whoever won the war. The Maratha court would take its time. It always did. That procrastinating spirit, as Malet described in one of his letters to Cornwallis, was what drove him closest to despair. He was a man of urgent purpose, and he was sitting in an institution that ran on delay. Every meeting with Nana Phadnavis produced the same courteous, non-committal response. The Marathas were listening. They were considering, but they would need more time. And Malet knew that if he pressed too hard, if he appeared too eager, too dependent, the price of Maratha support would climb, and the terms of the eventual agreement would shift against him. Patience was a weapon that Nana Phadnavis wielded with more precision than any Maratha general ever wielded a sword. And while all of this was going on, Tipu's diplomats weren't idle. They were working every channel that was open to them. And now for a short commercial break, and when I come back, let's talk about how Malet won this duel for diplomacy and what it took. Right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. RADA approved.
Malet, let me say that some people call it Malay or Malet. I'm sticking with Malet. Malet was not operating on charm and argument alone. He had tools. The most powerful was territorial. The Marathas had a long, specific, and deeply felt grievance against Tipu Sultan, and this was the Raichur Doab territories, fertile land in the northern Mysore reaches that Tipu had seized and held, and that Nana Phadnavis had spent years trying to recover through diplomacy, but without success. Malet's arguments cut directly to the point. Join the British alliance, he said, and those territories come back to you. Tipu is not going to hand them over willingly. He's held them for years, he's ignored every one of your diplomatic approaches, and the only way that you, the Marathas, will ever see the Raichur Doab restored to you is if Mysore is forced to the negotiation table by a coalition that it cannot defeat on the battlefield. The British cannot do it alone, he admitted. But together, British, Maratha, Nizam, the arithmetic changes entirely. Malet's pitch was stripped of all diplomatic language. It was a straightforward commercial transaction. The Marathas would provide cavalry. The British, in the eventual peace settlement, would support the Maratha territorial claim. But then there was the intelligence operation at work. Malet ran a network of informants inside the Pune court. They monitored who was meeting with Tipu's envoys, what was being said, what arguments were gaining traction, and with which ministers. Malet got this intelligence quickly enough to respond and counter-argue through his own channels, apply pressure, or if necessary, make sure that the minister's contact with Tipu's embassy became known to others in the court whose interests would point in a direction different from those meetings that were held. This is always the case in court politics. Factions. Maratha court politics was factional and competitive, and Malet used that to his advantage. And next, there was the matter of money. Now, the historical sources are rather, shall we say, discreet about this, but read it and it's clear enough. British money moved through the Pune court. Maratha ministers, according to historical accounts, were not averse to acting as paid agents for parties interested in a particular outcome of a negotiation. This was not considered scandalous by the standards of the 18th century Deccan politics. It's just how things were done, and Malet worked within that system. The crisis point came on the 8th of June, 1790. After weeks of formal protests, after repeated attempts to block their access, Peshwa granted Tipu's ambassadors a full state audience with all the ceremony that it implied. This was a calculated snub. The Marathas were signaling publicly and deliberately that they had not committed to the British camp, that they were sovereign decision makers still weighing their options, and that Charles Warre Malet did not have a veto over who the Peshwa chose to receive at his court. Malet's own accounts of the moment suggest that he found it deeply humiliating. He protested formally. He had warned against it. He had been overruled. But the June 8th audience, humiliating as it was for Malet, turned out to be the high water mark of Mysore diplomacy at Pune. It means that's the most they would ever get. After that date, the Maratha court began, slowly, without any dramatic announcement, to move. Malet's case was landing. The recovery of the Raichur Doab, the evidence of Tipu's appetite in Travancore, where he was battling recently, a man who attacked a small state over 2 forts in a thorn-filled ditch was not a man who would stop at those current borders. The straightforwardness of the British offer, credit and military commitment, against Tipu's offer of a future that required trust between two powers, the Mysore and the Marathas, who had been enemies within living memory. That last point, about them having been recent enemies, matters more than what historians usually acknowledge. Tipu's envoys were asking for the Marathas to take a risk on his vision, a future in which Mysore and the Maratha Confederacy together would expel the British from South India. That future required coordination, sustained commitment, and more importantly, it required trust. That was a commodity that was valuable at the time, and it wasn't there. And the Marathas had their own reasons not to trust Mysore. Hyder Ali himself, Tipu's own father, had dismissed Maratha promises as empty rhetoric from corrupt ministers, and you'd remember this from one of the previous episodes, where Hyder had said so in such blunt terms that left no room for any misunderstanding. That stung, and the memory hadn't faded. Charles Malet, on the other hand, was asking for something far simpler. Just commit your cavalry, recover your territory which you believe is yours. Let the British take the military risk of the main campaign. If you look at it, there was an asymmetry to what each side was doing in Pune. A risky shared vision from Tipu and a straightforward commercial transaction and territorial recovery from Malet. Quietly but decisively, the Marathas favored the British offer. By the time Cornwallis's army was ready to march from Vellore in February 1791, the deal was done. Parshuram Bhau, one of the senior Maratha commanders, was committed to attack northern Mysore. 10,000 Maratha cavalry would ride alongside the British. Nana Phadnavis had chosen territorial recovery over riskier southern alliances with Mysore. Tipu's envoys, Qutbuddin Khan and Ali Raza Khan, returned to Seringapatam, having failed. Their argument had been correct, but their offer had not been enough. What Charles Malet had built in Pune was, in plain terms, the condition that made the fall of Bangalore possible. The Triple Alliance, the British, the Marathas, and the Nizam of Hyderabad, didn't just make the campaign easier, they made the campaign winnable. Without Maratha cavalry screening the British advance, covering the supply lines from Tipu's fast-raiding looties, Cornwallis's army, burdened, as I said, with heavy siege artillery moving slowly through terrain that Tipu knew far better, would have been exposed at every step, and without a Maratha front in the north, Tipu could have concentrated his entire full force against one enemy on the ground of his own choosing. The Mysore plateau had swallowed British campaigns before. Without the Marathas, it might have swallowed this one too. But Charles Warre Malet's name doesn't appear in most accounts of the fall of Bangalore. Cornwallis gets the credit. The generals get the credit. The soldiers who stormed the breach get the credit. Malet gets a footnote, if he's lucky. But the army that marched from Vellore in February 1791 and reached the walls of the Bengaluru Pete in March rested at its most fundamental level on the argument that Malet had spent months building in the Peshwa's court. The army could not have marched without it, not safely, not with any reasonable prospect of success. Now the die was cast. In the next episode, Battle Plans, we get inside the military planning itself, how Cornwallis intended to take Bangalore, what Tipu was doing to prepare against it, and the geography of the Mysore plateau that would shape everything that followed. Coming up next, I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the history of Bangalore.